Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm really excited to introduce our newest PaintShop professional, who is a master at transforming regular photographs into surreal compositions. In this webinar, he'll share with us a little bit about himself, demo his favorite tools in PaintShop Pro, and share his top tips for creating pro-quality photo compositions. Before I pass it over, just a quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email tomorrow from GoToWebinar with a link to watch the recording as you please. So with that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over. Enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Carly. So my name is Kenjiro, and if any of the folks listening are familiar with me, it's probably because you have seen my YouTube channel, which is called PaintShop Pro. And on there, I demonstrate or have a lot of tutorials on just being able to do some digital art kinds of techniques and stuff. Focus on a number of different tools, but primarily on PaintShop Pro. So if I were to give just a quick intro on how my journey of PaintShop Pro, it's probably more a story of the context that I've kind of gone through, not really so much myself, but when I was in high school, my dad had PaintShop Pro on our family computer, and it was back in the days of like JASC version 6, so way back. And so it was there for me to use, and I played with it a little bit. But what really kind of made it take off for me was this was right about the time when photography became digital, and that was kind of huge for me because as soon as like digital cameras became affordable, I got one. It was like $100. It was like this garbage point and shoot that had like 1 megapixel in it, but I loved it because I didn't have to develop film. I didn't have to like take my roll to Costco, wait a week, and get something back. It was like I could take pictures and like do something with it, like just by downloading it to my computer. And so PaintShop Pro was sort of the post-processing tool I always used. And fast forward, enter college, and just was surrounded by folks who were pretty good at photography. My dad was also very good at photography, so it kind of inspired me, and I made it a goal to try to improve just in that area, to kind of develop some proficiency in that. And it kind of works out because what I found is people in college really like their pictures taken. Um, so you kind of went through that phase. Just finally got an SLR, right? Just kept evolving things. But then I kind of branched out, did a lot of different other digital creation pursuits, 3D modeling, video editing, sound, audio engineering kind of stuff, just all hobbies stuff. And fast forward to about 3 years ago, perhaps, I just wanted to try something that would pull all of that together, all of this knowledge. And so I had the idea of creating the YouTube channel, the PaintShop Pro YouTube channel. And PaintShop Pro was something I probably had the longest set of experience with, so decided to make the channel focused on that. So created some videos. Early ones are kind of embarrassing at this point for me, but always trying to improve as I go. But as it grew, achieved a state of awareness, I guess, or following that I could monetize the channel, and I started a Patreon page for anybody who's interested. And so with all the funds I make through ad revenue or Patreon, I'm able to donate that money to an organization called Compassion, which their focus is serving the needs of children who are born into poverty. And so PaintShop Pro has been really great for me, I think, from that point of view, that it's created a few avenues for me to just help folks. Obviously, one, through Compassion, but two, the more obvious one, being able to just share the knowledge I've gained, in using this tool for so long with different folks. And as the channel gained popularity, Corel, noticed it, and they reached out to me, and they offered me the potential to become a PaintShop professional, which I accepted. And so that's kind of led to this opportunity, and I feel privileged to be able to be a part of something like this webinar, so that I can share information with even more folks. So that's kind of my PaintShop Pro journey in a nutshell. But I think that's enough about me. And we can jump into the tutorial of what we're going to cover. There's a lot to cover, but I want to kind of go at a teaching pace. So we'll go ahead and transition to that. So what we're going to be trying to create today is this composition here. And we're going to be, and you may have seen this in like the flyer or whatnot, but we're going to be creating something like this, starting with these images. And I'm going to be covering kind of the tools that I like to use the most as we kind of go along the way. But I do want to start off talking about image selection, because I think image selection, although it's not a tool thing, is a really important part of how a composition comes together. And if you ever find yourself like watching a tutorial video, and you see the steps, you follow them all, right? And you're just like, okay, and you've got your own set of images, and you're like following everything to a T, but what you end up with isn't either like as internally consistent or quite as cohesive. I think a lot of times it's because maybe you didn't think too much about the image selection, but the person doing the tutorial was very strategic about what images they picked to ensure that everything kind of came together. So if we look at the images that I'm starting with, which these are all from pexels.com, they're all stock images. I didn't take any of these. You can kind of see that there's a little bit of consistency in terms of, there's no real harsh lighting in any particular scene. You might say maybe there's just like one distinct light source here on the woman's hair. But we're going to actually use that, and that's actually a key part of the composition. But otherwise, everything kind of has this ether kind of feel, starry context, or just like very, very simple shapes or whatnot. So for me, that was kind of a key thing in kind of selecting these images. But another aspect I just want to touch on briefly about image selection is, if you're doing something like a composition like this, and you're like me, right, I don't take any of my own photos, it's a matter of being able to find an anchor image. And so for me, the anchor image was the picture of the woman. And part of really what drew me in to this image was the expression on her face. And I think it's the authenticity of that expression, right? It's not a cheesy smile. It's not this like serious, like stare you down kind of a thing, but it almost kind of really plays into telling the story, or a story of the image, right? Like if I were to just come up with a quick narrative, it might be that she's out, right? I see flowers in a bag. Maybe she's just having a day and she's doing her thing, but she has her laptop, and that's probably like work related, I'm gonna say, right? That she always has to be available for work. And I feel like when I see the expression on her face, it's something like, man, there's some stress, or there's some like inner tension or something kind of going on, but it's like muted, right? Like that it's all internal. And although I don't like endorse cigarette smoking for health adverse reasons, you could almost say that like the cigarette is the thing that's just helping it suppress like just all this being overwhelmed and all this kind of stuff. And so, I really kind of was driven by the authenticity of the expression on her face, and really all of the other images you see around it are, as I started looking around for supporting imagery, that these could help as I built up the composition to retell the narrative. So, and one thing we'll see is that as I'm really interested in trying to focus on the expression on our face, it's going to drive a lot of the decisions for how the composition is going to come together, like some of those details. So, all right, a lot of explanation for the beginning, and now let's no kidding, actually jump into some like real steps, real getting into actually doing some real stuff. So here's the starting image, like we talked about. And the first thing we're going to do is try to isolate her from her background. And the way that I'm going to do that is using the background eraser. I really like using the background eraser just because of how good it handles, or how well it handles complex shapes. And one of the things that to me helps with using the background eraser is to kind of create a background underneath the layer you're trying to erase that's like a solid color. So the way we can do that is if we just come down here where the layer tools are, and we can just click on this and say new raster layer. And if you hold shift while you're clicking on this, it'll bypass the creation or throwing up that dialog box, which I never do anything with anyway, so it can just save you a little bit of time. So we have our new raster layer, and I just want to fill that with some kind of color that's pretty obvious. So select the color from the materials palette and choose the flood fill tool, or you can just press F and then click anywhere on the screen. It's going to fill it all. But what we want is for this to be underneath the background layer. So to do that, we can right click on the background layer and say promote background layer. And this just makes sure it's floating, right? It's not the base layer that's locked in. And now we can simply drag that layer above it, and we have this black layer underneath. So now if we go to the eraser tool, what we'll see is this little caret here will allow us to choose between the different eraser tools, and I want to use the background eraser. So you can kind of see the settings I have here. This is I usually kind of keep it in this set of settings: auto tolerance and hardness pretty high. And the one thing that I do is just play with the sharpness. And I think the sharpness is what gives you that level of control that is a little bit, in my opinion, better than what masks can do, although masks are less destructive. But we're just going to come in and we're just going to start clicking and dragging, and you'll see that what that's doing is it's starting to erase the background all around. And one thing I'll say is that with using this tool, I like to kind of do short clicks and short drags. And part of the reason is because if you find yourself, it's kind of erasing a piece that you didn't quite want, and you undo per se, you don't lose as much of the work. And another thing too is instead of just dragging, you can always just single click and it'll have the same kind of effect. And really what we're doing right now is just kind of creating a boundary around her, right? And then we'll worry about removing the other parts later. Now, right now I'm kind of operating at a pretty high sharpness, but you'll see that if I kind of drop this down, it'll do a lot better, around where the hair is and all these kind of areas. So when you have like a pretty sharp edge that a nice defined edge that the background eraser can detect a difference, then I think a higher sharpness works better. But if you're dealing with things like hair or something a little less defined, then a lower sharpness works. And so we're kind of doing this. So I'm not isolating the whole subject. I'm actually keeping this foreground, you'll see. So I'm doing just enough to kind of create this sort of a region of separation. And then what I can do is just go to selections, click freehand selection, and in freehand mode, right? So just free drawing, no shapes or anything like that. I can, with the same layer still selected, I can just kind of draw in this nice region, this nice erased region that I've created, and drag even beyond the bounds of the image. And then after that whole region is selected, I can just hit delete and all of that extra has been erased. And then now, just real quickly, I'm gonna use the regular eraser just to clean up some of these other little things, right, which are really obvious because of the fact that I have this, nice solid color background to show me where I kind of miss things. Now, granted, we are going to bring in another background in its place, so it's not really the worst thing if any of these little areas are still there, but just for completeness of the technique. Maybe that was too much. There we go. All right. So we've isolated our subject from the background. So now we can bring in sort of the replaced background. And this is the image of the mountains with the lake. If you're aware or not, you can actually drag an image from Windows Explorer, which currently for me that's off screen. But you can click and drag, and then you can actually you can choose where you want that to go, what layer you want to drop it in. So since I want to drop it behind, I'm just gonna drop it here, and you can see like that sort of highlighted bar shows you where it's going to end up. So we've got our synthetic background here, and I might like raise it up a little bit, maybe even a little bit more. If you remember in the composition, we kind of got, this like jellyfish kind of coming up here and maybe a little bit more. And so the current composition really doesn't support that. So what I want to do is I want to, give myself a little bit more margin on the top. And there's a few ways that we can do this, but the preferred way I'd say in this case is to use image canvas size. Another thought is to use add borders, but the issue with add borders is it'll flatten your image if you do that. So in my case, since I'm still in an arena of trying to have layers and do stuff, canvas size works out a little bit better. So what you'll see in this dialog box is that it tells you what your current image's dimensions are, which is helpful because I only really want to add some canvas to one dimension, and that's the height. And so by setting the width to be the same as what it originally is, we'll see that no margin is going to be added to the left or the right. And then by increasing the height beyond what is the existing one, it's going to now add some margin. And so essentially, what this is just showing is that I'm going to add margin. The canvas is going to be increased, but all the content exists. I want to reside here, or like whichever one of these boxes you select is saying I want it. That's where I want the existing content to be. And so all the new canvas will be added in all these other regions. So for me, it's perfect because I want the canvas to expand upward, and it even's more clear here by saying it's on the top. So I click OK, and then we'll see the whole, the whole canvas got increased, but my sky doesn't quite make it there. So then now I can select it and drag it up to just kind of make sure it gets where it covers the top end, but I think I kind of want the horizon to be a little bit lower. And interestingly enough, you'll notice that I was about to adjust the scale, but right now the mode is set to perspective, which is not what I want. That's not going to do what I want it to do. So if I go to mode here and I change it to scale, then when I go here, I can see my icon is more indicative of it's going to actually adjust the scale. So now I can pull it. I want to make it a little bit bigger, right? I kind of, like I said, the emphasis for me for this composition is the woman's face. So like even these subtle things like, the lines of the horizon, I really wanted to lead the viewer's view to her face. So so let's see here. So okay, now we've kind of got the initial composition of all these layers, but again, focusing on this whole idea of, I want the focus to be here. In this new composition, I think the bag is actually a distraction. So we're gonna kind of do some stuff here to try to remove the bag, and we're gonna use some techniques that I like, which is copy selection and the clone tool. So we'll start off doing copy selection, and really removing something is all about how much reference data you have available to you to replace it with. And so for me, that source data is going to be pretty much this tiny region over here. And so we'll just do the best we can to kind of work with that to make this seemingly go away. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be good enough. You'll see that in the final composition. It won't really matter too much, or it won't be that noticeable. So with my subject layer selected, I can go to selections, and I'll just do the standard box selection, rectangle. And really all I'm going to do is just grab like this grassy region that's over here and copy. And just because I feel like it gives me the most flexibility, right click to get rid of the selection, I paste as a new layer. And so you can do that with Control L. And then with the pick tool, I can now reposition this grass that I put on here. And then you'll see, right, it kind of, does the effect of kind of getting rid of some of this stuff. And then the way you kind of make it a little bit more meaningful in terms of just being here is you just take your eraser, standard eraser, not background eraser, maybe with some lower hardness or whatnot. Just kind of like get rid of that like distinct line, that's kind of there. Obviously, we're not getting rid of all of the bag yet, but you can kind of just see how that technique could work. So I'm just gonna, at this stage, commit to that and then just right click on the layer and say merge down. And so this is just gonna get rid of this one layer, this one new layer that I created of putting it down. And that's now officially part of the existing layer. So we kind of got the corner covered here, but for the rest of it, let's go ahead and use the clone tool. So over here, in this area where we have all of our, object removing tools, we'll just use a straight clone tool. And so once again, this is all about the reference that we're going to use. And we're just going to have to kind of use the same reference over and over again. To use this, you just kind of find a place that you want to source your data from and like right click. And so that now sets your source. And then all the left clicks that follow are going to kind of be the replacement of that. And one of the keys I found with using the clone tool is just constantly readjusting your source, right? Like if you're that I think that gives you the best opportunity to not get that like notorious clone pattern, that makes it really obvious that the clone tool was being used. But let's see. So like here, the grass is a little bit grayer and a little bit like thicker. So I'm gonna use that area for this region down here. And again, just kind of constantly, resourcing, just to get like close enough, right? Good enough. We're really just trying to make it so that that bag is not as prominent as it used to be. All right. So I'm going to claim that's good enough for the purposes of what we're trying to do. Obviously, if you really care about how nice this looks, you might spend a little bit more time on that. And so as always, regularly save. So now we're going to get into the color grading stage. And I think to achieve the color grading I'm looking for, we're going to need to first do some hue reduction. And we're going to use some adjustment layers for this. So the first one, we'll do some hue reduction on the background layer. So what I'm going to do, because I want to use adjustment layers, is to first create a layer group. And once again, holding shift to create it so it doesn't give me the dialog box. And part of the reason for doing a layer group is because when you use adjustment layers are automatically going to affect everything below it. And so the only way you can isolate it to a specific set of layers is by putting layers in a group. Now you could argue in this case there's nothing below it, so it doesn't matter, but I think it's a good practice if your intent is to only affect a single layer, because if for whatever reason later you decide to put something underneath, it's not going to have some unintended effect. So we have background and selected in our group, and then I can come into adjustment layers and select hue, saturation, and lightness. And really all I'm going to do here is just kind of bring the total, like, all colors, bring it down just enough so that it's not really like too prominent. But I don't want to bring it all the way down because there is a little bit of hue variance in the sky that I think will just give a little bit, a little bit of character to the final composition after we color, color overlay this thing. So background layers now have been muted, and we're going to do something similar for the subject. We want to do something kind of similar. So once again, new layer group from down here. And then with the raster layer selected, let's go to hue, saturation, and lightness adjustment layer once again. Now, but what we're going to do a little bit differently here is, again, with the emphasis being on trying to draw the viewer's attention to the face. I want to mute everything except for the colors that are like right around here, which essentially is like red and magenta. So instead of doing master, I'm going to actually march through every single one of these other colors and essentially just completely desaturate them. Green, So this is going to kind of pull down the grass, make the grass less obvious. It's going to pull down maybe even some slight hues in the suit that she's wearing or other things. And the magenta, pull down a little bit, but not all the way, because I don't want to kind of like change the complexion or whatnot too much, but still kind of have that there. So then what you have is this kind of like really interesting picture in and of itself, right? Like this sort of black and white, but the selective color still there. Um, but ultimately, what this is going to allow us to do, that if I create a new raster layer, or wait, sorry, select the top layer group, because I want whatever's selected when you create a new layer, it's going to show up on top of it. So group, select the top group selected. I want a new raster layer, and then I'm going to come once again to just my flood fill tool, or just press F. And then just pick a color, like whatever color I want to kind of represent my sort of nighttimey feel, color. I'm going to pick like a pretty light purple, and I'm just going to flood fill. And then, so obviously that blocks everything. But if I change the blend mode of this layer to soft light, then what we see is it kind of like color casts the image, right? But you still have whatever color variance still affecting it. So that's why everything is almost homogeneous in color at this point, except for right where we really want to draw the user's attention. And if it feels like it's a little too washed out, color-wise, you can always decrease the opacity, to whatever level you kind of appreciate it. You feel like it's kind of pulling things together. That can be this can be another fun activity, is if you can keep track of how many times I say or pronounce opacity incorrectly. I do it at least once in every single one of my videos on my channel. So all right, so we have now achieved the color casting. And so now we're going to bring in some of the other subjects, like the jellyfish. Just because background erasing is kind of boring, really, in nature, I'm bringing in the jellyfish, but it's already been removed from the background, as you saw from the original image. It's a pretty accommodating background, right? Just solid blue, and the jellyfish itself is of a different color and luminance. So pretty easy to remove, not a big deal to try to think too much about. And so, in my sort of artistic expression of what's going on here, right, the idea was that this what was a cigarette now becomes this magical device that a jellyfish kind of comes out of. And the trail, the tentacles or whatever you want to call it, are kind of like commensurate with like a smoke trail. But so really it's just a matter of bringing this in, right, having background erased it, and then using the pick tool to kind of do some scaling and reorienting and whatnot. And so you could just drag this below, and it would kind of be a little bit more in line with probably how it should be, right? We don't want the trails going in front. I'd rather have the trails going in back. But I do want to demonstrate a little bit about masking, so we're going to kind of do this a slightly different way. What I'm going to do is actually create a mask based on the opacity of the layer below it. So the way we can do this is by creating a mask based on the image. So to do this, what we're going to do is we are going to have the layer that we want to mask be selected. But then what we're going to do is actually turn the visibility of everything else off. And this seems a little counterintuitive, but we're going to turn the visibility of everything else off except for the thing that defines the opacity of what we want our mask to be based on. So jellyfish, layer selected, but the visible view of the image is based on what we want our mask to be. And then I can come down to this mask button and say from image. Now this dialog box I do want, because what I want to do is I want to say, use the opacity of this image to determine how the mask is going to be defined. So then I will hit OK. And then what we'll see is something that looks like a mask, right? As you can see here, generated for our jellyfish. Now, if I turn this off and I turn the jellyfish back on, what you'll see is it kind of did the opposite of what we wanted, right? Like it's actually only showing the portion that would cover the woman's face, but really we want everything else. So with the mask layer selected, I can very simply just go to image and then go to negative image to invert that. Now, the invert was available also in the dialog previously, if you noticed. It's just, it may not always be obvious which way it should be. So I was just showing this to show that if you got it wrong the first time, this is a very simple way to fix it. So, so that, excuse me. So now that we've got, this all masked out nicely and everything like that, we can kind of turn everything back on. And now we have this sort of appearance like the jellyfish is actually behind her, even though layer wise it's in front. All right, so now that actually what works out too is that since we have this in a mask layer, it also is a layer group, which means we can naturally add adjustment layers and it'll be isolated just to the jellyfish. So in this case, I kind of, my goal is to have this main jellyfish be kind of glowing. So, for all those who have always been interested in the glow effect, I'm going to show a few approaches of how you can do that here. So first thing for sure, if something's going to glow, it probably should be bright. So my go-to, luminance control tool is levels, primarily because I just feel like it has a very natural effect on things because of the relationship it has between the darks, middle, and the brightness as you adjust any one of the sliders. And in this case, I really just want to kind of like, brighten it, right? And brightening is really just a matter of kind of dragging the top end to the left or even dragging like the middle to the left. You'll see that it has the effect of just increasing the luminance of the subject. So I really want it to be bright, but I don't want to lose too much detail in here. I still want that level of character to be there. So just, bringing it up, and we're going to add a little bit more brightness to this in another way anyway. So seems good enough, but what's nice is that since this is an adjustment layer, I can always go back and adjust it again if I need to. It's non-destructive in that way. Let's see. So next, also want to hue reduce, right? Just like other things before, so that it kind of matches with the rest of the scene. So add another adjustment layer. And in this case, we can probably just do all color and just bring it down just so that it kind of is less outstanding, right? Because I kind of want to draw the attention just enough so that it can flow to her, but I don't want it to become the point of interest in this image. So bring it down, but once again, because it's a adjustment layer, I can always come back and tweak it if I need to. And so, okay, so now we've kind of got something that's, it doesn't necessarily look like it's glowing. It just looks like it's bright. So the way we can kind of give it more of a glow effect is I'm actually going to duplicate the entire group. And I can do that just by right clicking and clicking duplicate. And then what I want to do is I want to blur it. I want to give it that sort of glowing halo. So I can say adjust blur, and then just for larger blurs, especially if you're using a larger image, I think Gaussian blur gives the most flexibility. And you'll notice that it's going to tell you, hey, blur operations can only be done on a singular raster layer, and that's okay. Like I'm kind of committed at this point of where this thing is and what it looks like, that I'm good with having it flatten just this group and then be able to apply a blur to it. So and in this case, just because of how big or the resolution of my image, pretty good blur, I think, is what I'm going to go for here. I really want that halo to show up. And so there we go. So, for some folks, this may be a kind of glow that you like, or maybe for whatever composition you're doing, this may work for you and you're done, like in terms of a glow effect. So this is kind of one glow effect here, right? It really kind of, maybe it's a glow in like a foggy kind of environment or something like that. But I want to kind of deviate a little bit and show another approach that's just a continuation of this, and that's to take this sort of blurred layer and change its blend mode to dodge. And so then what you'll see is that, I mean, that really, I mean, it almost is like saturating your sensor, right? If you were taking this photograph here. But you know, it's a little too much, right? Like I've kind of lost the detail that was on the jellyfish. So once again, can always just like dial it back, and we may need to dial it back quite a bit. But it just really added that like sort of you know, overwhelming kind of glowing effect that you can barely, you know, see too much detail. But now you might say, well, that's good, but we kind of lost the halo, right? You know, in that process, and it's true, it's totally true. So what we can do to kind of bring the halo back in this sort of instance is to duplicate this, you know, the blurred dodge diversion, but let's like bring it back and let's change it to normal, but let's drag it underneath the original. So we have the original, which is still the group. It has all the details of the, you know, jellyfish or whatever. We have sort of the dodge layer, which kind of really gives it that shine, and then we have the normal blurred layer underneath, which then preserves the halo, right? That sort of halo effect. So there's one way or two ways, I suppose, that you can kind of do a glow effect on something. And we'll save. All right, so next, what I want to do is add some what I'm going to call atmosphere. And the reason why is because you know, there's this jellyfish, there's going to be more jellyfish, but you know, if there's jellyfish kind of like floating around, and I know this seems like really abstract, but if there's jellyfish floating around, you kind of get the sense that maybe there should be some medium that the jellyfish should be floating in, and like air, you know, maybe to me it like visually doesn't really do it. What I wanted to use to try to create this atmosphere, air quotes, was sort of this image of like space, and really the part that gives it the atmosphere is mostly the texture that comes with this, all these little stars and little glowy things that you see, right? Almost as if you're underwater, maybe they're bubbles or something like that. And so, but to blend this into our scene, there's a really easy way to do this, and that's to make the blend mode screen. And so what that does, what you'll see is screen is sort of like a self-imposed luminance mask, right? Like that if it's a dark luminance value, it basically becomes transparent, and if it's bright, it's going to be visible. But I just realized I got a little bit ahead of myself on this because I actually want this to also be masked, because we're going to want to remove some distracting elements. So I'm going to return this to normal. And then what I'm going to do is create a mask, but this time I'm not going to base it on anything. I just want a standard mask, and I want it to show all, meaning basically don't hide anything, make it solid white. It's going to be pure. And now in this case, if you want a group to, or if I want this atmosphere to affect the image like it did before, I actually have to adjust the blend mode of the group, not the actual layer. So in here, I will change it to screen. All right, so we're back to where we were, but now we have a mask, and we'll get to the mask part in a second. But you see, we're back to where we were. You know, atmosphere is in place, but personally, it's a little too much. Like, I think it's a little too dense. There's like way too much grain, and there's too many stars and stuff like that. But if we understand how the screen blend mode works, what we can recognize is that we can reduce that density just by making the image darker. So if I select atmosphere and then go to adjustment layers and say levels, then really all I want to do is kind of drag the middle slider to the right, because it's going to take some of those gray tones and make them dark enough that they are less perceptible in the image. So it's really convenient, right, from that point of view of being able to control, you know, just how much grain or how much atmosphere is going to be in the image. And once again, adjustment layer, so can always go back and play with that as necessary. Now, again, focus is here. Don't want all these other things, so I'm gonna speed up just a little bit because I'm kind of repeating myself at this point. And we're just going to be decreasing the saturation. just so that anything that has color doesn't distract from where I want the viewer to focus. So now we've talked about masks in terms of how they can just be applied to kind of like hide things, block things, or whatever. But now we're going to use this mask to strategically like erase things, if you will, but in a non-destructive manner. So in the same way you would an eraser, when you have a mask layer selected, black means erase, if you will, in air quotes, and white means to unerase. So now that I have my mask layer selected, I can just grab a regular brush, select black as my primary color, and like all of these like really bright things that to me are kind of distracting, I just want to kind of low hardness, high opacity, just want to kind of like get rid of them, right? Like I just kind of really don't want them to be there. Okay, that's not on that layer, so that's going to be there. But then in these other areas that are kind of like overlapping where she is, maybe don't decrease the opacity and just kind of like take a few click passes on here just to kind of tone it down, right? Just don't want anything being too distracting, but to still provide that sort of atmosphere. Now the other thing too is I don't want this again to obscure, so I'm going to even kind of clear this area out a little bit so that it's not like speckling her face. And let's see here. All right, awesome. So there's sort of like the atmosphere. Now for the purposes of saving time, once again, compositionally, I did want there to be more jellyfish in there, so I've already isolated them and even positioned them prior, and then so I'm just kind of like dropping it in as a finished layer. And again, they're positioned there just to give a little bit more, interest of like, hey, it's not just one jellyfish, but it's like a whole collection of them. Maybe this little magical device just kind of keeps popping them out. But we start to see compositionally though how this glowing thing perhaps really is providing the light source that's kind of shining on here, and everything else is really just dark nighttime feel. Then the last aspect of being able to kind of provide this overarching honing in is I like to add vignette to the image. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. PaintShop Pro even has a tool specifically for doing that. The method that I prefer to use is actually using a gradient fill. And so once again, we're going to create a new raster layer on the top. And instead, when I click on my material, I'm going to go to gradient, and you'll see we're in the circular mode. And I have one called vignette, which I created this. I always create this, even if I get new PaintShop Pro or I migrate the material, I always use this. And you'll see it's really just color-wise, it's just black all the way. But from a transparency point of view, it gradients to full transparency pretty quick, right? It's a pretty quick drop off here. So kind of doing this material setup in a radial fashion. If you have the flood fill tool selected, you can just drop it on there and you get this nice sort of like darkened corners that blends in with the rest of the image. Now, why do I prefer to use this over using the tool? Is primarily because I like to always have it blend in, and so this gives me the option to use blend layers and how this vignette gets applied. Oftentimes I like to use soft light just because I feel like it's a little more natural in the way that it's applied. And again, can always dial back the opacity to make it work out a little bit better, or to if it's too intense, right? You can always dial it back. Let's see. So that's kind of like the main, like we're nearly there, right? You look at the image, we're like pretty much there. It looks like we have a little bit time, so there was like two other little things that I wanted to cover that can just provide even more emphasis and are interesting things to go do. And that's with the group, or sorry, with the woman. We're coming back to the woman. And so, perhaps you might say, you know what, I want to kind of punch the color just here, just like a little bit, right? So I already have a hue saturation that's doing the hue reduction. And so on top of that, with that layer selected, I want to do a new adjustment layer, and we'll call this we'll use a vibrancy one. And so then what that's going to do is if we dial it up just a little bit, it's going to punch only the color that's been allowed through, right? So the only thing that's been allowed through from the layer below it is sort of the reddish, color. And now we're saying let's punch that a little bit, but using vibrancy instead of the hue, saturation, lightness, just to continue to emphasize, where I want the user or the viewer to be focused. Now, could argue even that, oh, the hand is starting to get, distracting. Like, I remember my focus is the expression on the face, not like the hand. So maybe that color punch wasn't strategic from that point of view. But one thing really cool about adjustment layers is it in itself is a mask. So if I select this layer, you'll see that it's just showing this block, which is all white. But if I select my, normal paintbrush, full, maybe not full opacity, we'll keep it at half. And let's say I return back to my black. We hone in on where the hand is. I can paint black over this, and what you'll see is it essentially, well, actually, in this case, I think I'm going to go full. When I paint over this in here, it essentially has now removed the vibrancy impact altogether, right? So then the vibrancy impact was only on the face. But let's take it, even a step further and say, let's say we want to, desaturate this, just a hand, even further, so that we can really, really hone in here. I can actually add yet another adjustment layer here, and we'll even go, hue, saturation, lightness. Oops. Oh yeah. So this is good. I accidentally held shift while I created that, so the dialog didn't come up. But if you ever want to revisit a adjustment layer that you've already, applied, you can always right click on it and go to properties, and then that will bring up the actual adjustment dialog. And so in this case, let me dial this down, right, just enough so that I feel like the hand is more muted than the rest of the face. And I think, that's pretty good for now. However, again, because adjustment layers affect everything below it, we've now affected the face. But going through applying the same exact principle as we did with the hand, I can just paint black on this adjustment layer and then get the full effect of, all of my vibrancy or whatnot from underneath back onto it. So then now, if we survey the final image here, right? And then we look at all the goals that were in place, right? Trying to remove distractions. We try to remove distractions from color. We try to remove distractions in terms of objects. But at the same time, created emphasis right here. I feel like the goal of what this transformation wasn't just to create this abstract image, but it almost kind of changes the narrative. Like, I feel like when I look at this image now, I don't see like a stressed out woman who's like doing work and like, it's ruining her day and she's suppressing it with smoking, whatever. But that it's kind of like, here, instead, like, that expression perhaps is more of like a quiet confidence, right? That she's here in this nice environment in these mountains, and she's here intentionally doing something. And maybe even what's like on her computer is something challenging or whatnot, but that quiet confidence is because of, she's good where she's at, and she's got all her jellyfish friends to, help her in whatever she's going to face. Yeah, and I think if I were to give this image a name, maybe it would be like air quotes, "got a light," or something like that. But that's it, and I'm proud of myself because I feel like I was able to finish this in time. Hopefully, it wasn't too fast though. So I'll hand it back to you, Carly.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really excellent presentation. And thank you so much for the introduction of yourself and your background and your story. Really enjoyed watching that entire presentation from beginning to end. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks to everyone very much for joining today. And just again, keep an eye out for that follow-up email you'll receive tomorrow from GoToWebinar with a link to watch the recording of this presentation if you please. Okay, thanks so much everyone. We'll see you next time.